What if I told you that one of the most important stories in history, a story that shapes the faith of literally billions of people, is actually told in two completely different ways? That's what we're digging into today. We're looking at the story of Abraham, Ishmael, and the city of Mecca. And you're going to see how two of the world's most sacred texts lay out two very, very different maps for the same events. Okay, so let's start right here with a place millions of people know, the Kaaba in Mecca. I mean, it's one of the most iconic structures on the planet. Now, Islamic tradition tells us that this sacred house was built by none other than Abraham and his son Ishmael. And this verse you see here from the Quran, well, it's believed to be Abraham's own prayer, right after he settled his family in this place, which the text calls a valley without cultivation, basically the middle of nowhere. All right, so Mecca Sacred House. Let's dig into this story a bit more, specifically looking at the Islamic sources.
So where does this story come from? Well, a lot of the details are in the Hadith. Those are the collected sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and they really paint a picture. They describe Abraham traveling with Hagar and their baby son Ishmael all the way to this very spot. Then, years later, Abraham comes back, and that's when God commands him and Ishmael to build the Kaaba. This act basically puts Mecca on the map as the center of pilgrimage. And believe me, this event is absolutely foundational to Islam.
Okay, so here's where things get really, really interesting. A claim of confirmation. You see, the Quran doesn't present itself as a brand new story out of thin air. Instead, it says it's here to confirm the scriptures that came before it. And verses like this one are absolutely key to understanding that relationship. The Quran says it's here to confirm the previous books, not replace them. And look, it specifically calls out the Torah as a source of guidance and light, something prophets have been using for ages. So the Quran is essentially saying, hey, that book, the Torah, it's the real deal. So you can probably see where this is going, right? This leads us to the big central question of this whole explainer. If the Quran says it confirms the Torah, then what story does the Torah actually tell about Abraham and Ishmael? You'd expect them to match up, wouldn't you? All right, let's get into it. Two narratives, two maps. And this is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Because when you put these two accounts next to each other, well, a totally different map starts to take shape. The geography, the actual locations in the story, they just don't line up. You know, the book of Genesis is super specific about its geography. It's not vague at all. It puts Hagar and Ishmael's entire story way up north. We're talking about places like Beersheba and the wilderness of Paran. That's in the modern-day Sinai and Negev deserts, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Mecca. And here's the kicker. There is absolutely zero mention of them ever taking a journey south into Arabia. Not a word. And this table just lays it all out, clear as day. This is the core of the disagreement. In the biblical story, you've got a teenage Ishmael getting sent away from his home. But in the Islamic story, he's just a baby, and his dad, Abraham, personally takes him all the way to Mecca. These are not small details. We're talking about two completely different journeys, completely different timelines, and completely different destinations for the exact same people. And just to put a number on this to make it really concrete, the trip from where Abraham lived in Canaan down to Mecca is about 1,350 kilometers. That's over 800 miles. And remember, that's just one way. The amount of days it would take to travel from where Abraham initially was to far away Mecca would take 40 days. And the Islamic account says Abraham did this massive trek multiple times, but the Torah, which is otherwise pretty detailed about Abraham's travels, doesn't mention this epic journey even once. Not a single time. Kind of strange, right? Okay, so it's not just about the maps. The differences go even deeper. Let's compare Ishmael's story now and look at the specifics of his life. So check this out. In the Torah, when Ishmael is sent away, he's not a little baby. He's a teenager, probably around 16 or 17. He's old enough to handle himself. But in the Islamic tradition, he's a nursing infant. He's completely helpless, being carried by his mother Hagar on this incredibly long journey. That's a huge, huge difference in who the character of Ishmael even is at this critical moment. Now, this next one, this has massive implications for who his descendants are. Genesis is crystal clear. His mom, who was Egyptian, got him a wife from, you guessed it, Egypt. But the Hadith tells a totally different story. It says he married a woman from a local Arab tribe, the Jurhum, right there in Mecca. This is critical because this is what establishes him as the father of the Arabs of Mecca. And finally, let's look at Abraham's role in all this, because it's completely different too. In one story, you have a heartbroken Abraham sending his son and Hagar away with just some bread and water. It's a painful separation. In the other story, he's the proactive leader, taking them on this epic journey himself to set them up with a new home and even a holy sanctuary. It's a total flip in his character and his actions.
Okay, so let's put all these pieces together. We're getting to the big foundational question here.
So let's just do a quick recap. The location, totally different. Paran versus Mecca. The journey, sent away versus taken on a 1,350-kilometer trip. Ishmael's age, teenager versus infant. His wife, Egyptian versus Arab. And maybe the biggest one of all, the entire story of building the Kaaba, this sacred sanctuary, is in one story and just completely missing from the other. And so all of this leads us to one final, really thought-provoking question that kind of gets to the heart of everything we've looked at. What we've seen isn't just a few minor details being off. The accounts are, when you look at the evidence in the texts themselves, geographically, chronologically, and thematically, well, they seem impossible to reconcile. They're just not the same story. So the question you have to ask is this: how can one sacred text claim to confirm another when it tells a completely different version of one of its most important foundational stories?